The small hall was buzzing quietly with chatter as people found their seats. The walls were plain, painted in soft cream, and the wooden floor creaked under the weight of those moving around. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, casting warm lines across the chairs and small stage at the front. There was nothing particularly fancy about this place, and yet, it felt alive with expectation. People had come for the talent showcase, a local event that happened every year, and most were curious to see what the performers would bring. Some were friends and family, some were neighbors, and some were simply there out of habit, enjoying a calm Sunday afternoon. She stood quietly near the back of the room, holding a small, worn folder under her arm. Her clothes were simple, neat, but not flashy, blending easily into the crowd. She wasn't here to draw attention, nor did she seem to care about it. There was a calmness about her, a gentle confidence that didn't need loud gestures or bright colors. She watched the other performers, noting the kids fidgeting with their instruments, the teenagers practicing their lines, and the occasional adult who seemed nervous despite years of experience. She smiled faintly, not at anyone in particular, just a soft smile that carried warmth but no pride. Around her, people were talking, laughing quietly, and adjusting their seating. Some whispered to friends, guessing who might be the best, who might fail, and who would surprise them. Their conversations were filled with familiar patterns, comments about age, experience, and talent that they expected to see. Everyone seemed ready to judge, to measure each performer by the same scale. The atmosphere was casual, almost too casual, as if the event had become more about passing time than celebrating skill. Yet, there was a subtle excitement too, a sense that today might hold something unexpected. She shifted slightly, feeling the smooth texture of her folder. Inside were sheets of music, carefully marked and folded, not flashy but precise. She didn't care for applause or recognition. Her music was personal, a quiet conversation with herself and, sometimes, with anyone willing to listen. She had spent countless hours practicing in solitude, hidden from the world, shaping her skills without anyone noticing. Music was not her performance. It was her refuge, her way to breathe when life felt heavy. And yet, here she was, about to step into a space where strangers might see her talent. The organizers called the first performers to the stage. A young boy with a bright, confident smile walked up and began his piece on the violin. The audience clapped politely, some genuinely impressed, others barely paying attention. Next came a teenager reading poetry, stumbling over words but finishing with a small, proud bow. One by one, people went up, each bringing something ordinary, familiar, or charmingly amateurish. The audience responded accordingly, with polite applause, quiet chuckles, and nods of appreciation. It was all ordinary, predictable, the kind of event people attended to pass a quiet afternoon. She watched from the side, her eyes calm and steady. She noticed little details, how some performers held their instruments tightly, how some avoided eye contact, and how the audience leaned forward only when something truly captured their attention. She was not nervous in the way most people might be before performing. There was a quiet readiness, a stillness that felt natural. Inside, there was no rush, no panic, just the awareness that the time would come to sit at the piano, breathe, and let her hands speak. As the next performer finished, a few people murmured about the variety of talent. Some seemed entertained, others impatient. The hall was filled with small sounds, whispers, coughs, the rustling of programs, and the occasional creak of a chair. It was comfortable in its own way, a familiar background for anyone who had ever been part of a local gathering. The hum of normal life, punctuated by brief moments of attention, created a rhythm that she found strangely soothing. When her name was finally called, a few heads turned briefly, curiosity flickering in their eyes. She stepped forward calmly, holding her folder close but not tightly. There was no sudden dramatic entrance, no hesitation, just a smooth walk to the piano. She sat down, her posture relaxed but precise, and placed the sheet music gently on the stand. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a brief moment, not nervously tapping, not trembling, just poised, ready. It was the kind of calm that came from countless hours of preparation, not performance anxiety. The room seemed to settle, a quiet anticipation filling the air. The audience watched with mild curiosity at first, unsure what to expect. She began with a simple tune, something light and familiar, almost casual. People nodded politely, some tapping their feet, others whispering to neighbors. It was ordinary, exactly what they had expected. And yet, for those who listened closely, there was something different. Her touch on the keys was soft but precise, each note clear and deliberate. There was a subtle grace in the way her fingers moved, a rhythm that felt both natural and intentional. It was quiet genius, the kind that didn't demand attention but could not be ignored once noticed. Some in the audience glanced at each other, sensing that something unusual was happening. They couldn't quite name it yet, but there was a feeling that this performance might not be like the others. She didn't rush, didn't try to impress. Every note seemed to breathe, carrying an emotional depth that reached beyond the simple tune. The hall was filled with sound that felt both familiar and new, comforting yet stirring something unexpected in those who listened. People began to pay more attention, leaning forward slightly, their casual chatter fading. For her, the moment was not about them, but about the music itself. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the tune flow naturally, allowing her fingers to find the harmony that lived in her mind for years. Each chord, each pause, each delicate shift in rhythm was not planned for effect, but for expression. The room, once filled with the ordinary sounds of a local showcase, became quiet, the energy shifting as people realized that this was no ordinary performance. Her hands told a story that words could not, a story of patience, dedication, and quiet brilliance kept hidden until now. As the first section of her piece ended, there was a brief pause, the kind that feels like the room is holding its breath. She opened her eyes, looked briefly at the audience, and then continued, letting the next part flow effortlessly. There was no showmanship, no exaggerated gestures, only music that demanded attention by its quality alone. People began to whisper, softly, almost to themselves, "How is she doing that?" Some exchanged surprised looks, realizing they had underestimated what this simple appearance might hold. At that moment, she was not performing for approval, applause, or recognition. She was simply allowing the music, her lifelong companion, to speak, and in doing so, she was quietly commanding the attention of everyone in the hall. For those few minutes, the ordinary hall, the plain walls, the creaking floor, all faded into the background. There was only the music and the subtle, undeniable brilliance emerging from a quiet woman who had never sought the spotlight before. She continued to play, letting the music guide her hands, feeling each note as if it were a living thing. The simple tune she had started with slowly began to change, not in a sudden or flashy way, but gently, like a river changing course. The rhythm shifted subtly, carrying a new depth that the audience hadn't expected. At first, the changes were almost unnoticeable to those not paying close attention, but then, little by little, the complexity grew. Her fingers moved faster, more confidently, dancing across the keys with a skill that was both delicate and commanding. The audience began to sense something extraordinary unfolding. People who had been casually watching straightened in their seats, leaning slightly forward, drawn into the music without realizing how deeply. There were no dramatic gestures, no exaggerated movements, only the quiet mastery in the way she played. Each note seemed to tell a story, each chord held an emotion that words could not express. Some people exchanged glances, their eyebrows raised, eyes widening, feeling that this was far more than a simple performance. She had noticed the change in the room's energy, but she did not let it distract her. Her focus remained entirely on the music, on the conversation between her fingers and the keys. Every movement was intentional, a result of years of quiet practice away from any stage or audience. The tune, which had seemed familiar, now began to evolve into something richer, more layered. Hints of new melodies intertwined with the original, creating a sound that felt both innovative and natural. The audience could feel the shift, though they could not yet put it into words. A few people began to whisper to their neighbors, soft murmurs of curiosity and surprise. "Is she really doing that?" one asked, voice barely above a whisper. Another shook their head slowly, unable to believe what they were hearing. The whisper spread like a gentle wave across the hall, but there was no interruption. Only the collective realization that something remarkable was happening. Even those who had come expecting ordinary performances now found themselves captivated. She played with a sense of freedom that came from confidence, not arrogance. There was joy in her fingers, a subtle smile in her heart, though it did not show on her face. Every note was a piece of her story, each chord a fragment of her journey. She thought of the countless quiet nights spent practicing alone, of the music that had comforted her through difficult times. Now, that same music flowed outward, touching strangers in ways she had never imagined. It was a quiet magic, a secret gift that had waited patiently to be shared. As the performance continued, the tune began to take on a new personality. What had started as simple and familiar now carried emotion so vivid, that it seemed to paint pictures in the minds of those listening. People imagined landscapes, memories, and dreams they had long forgotten. There was a softness in the slower sections that tugged at hearts, a strength in the louder passages that filled the room with energy. The music was alive, and so was the reaction it inspired. Some in the audience began to feel chills, the kind that run down your spine when something unexpectedly beautiful happens. Others had tears forming in their eyes, moved by the raw honesty of what they were hearing. She had not intended to impress, to amaze, or to elicit such reactions. She was simply playing, giving life to a melody that had always lived within her. Yet, the effect on those around her was undeniable, and slowly, the hall transformed from a place of casual spectatorship into a space of silent awe. She noticed the subtle changes in the audience, the way people were holding their breath, the way they were leaning into the music, as if trying to catch every note before it floated away. It was a rare silence, the kind that carries both respect and wonder. Some faces were open in astonishment, some reflective, some smiling in quiet delight. No one moved, no one whispered too loudly. They were all caught in the spell of a hidden talent that had emerged without warning. The energy in the room had shifted from casual expectation to rapt attention. As she played, small variations in the music began to emerge, each one reflecting a memory, a feeling, or an inspiration she could not fully explain. She was not thinking of rules, of scales, or technical perfection. She was thinking of emotion, of expression, of letting the music breathe and speak for itself. Every movement of her fingers carried a subtle nuance, a texture that made the notes shimmer and dance. The familiar tune was no longer recognizable as something ordinary. It had been transformed into a complex, flowing composition that felt timeless. Some in the audience started to whisper softly, unsure whether to speak or simply continue listening. "I have never heard anything like this," one murmured. Another whispered, "It's beautiful and impossible." Their words barely reached anyone else, but the feeling spread, an invisible wave that made the room seem smaller, more intimate. Despite the number of people present, every person felt as though they were being invited into a private, sacred space, sharing something that was not just a performance but a revelation. She noticed the gentle smiles, the slight movements of heads, the closing of eyes as people allowed the music to wash over them. Each reaction was unique, yet collectively, they confirmed what she already knew. This music, though born in solitude, could touch hearts. There was a profound satisfaction in seeing this connection unfold, a deep, unspoken bond forming between performer and audience. It was not applause that mattered, but the quiet recognition of effort, talent, and emotional honesty. The tempo began to shift again, a gradual acceleration that did not feel forced, but inevitable. The music rose and fell like waves, carrying with it a sense of journey, of movement through unseen landscapes. She allowed her emotions to influence the melody, letting the music reflect hope, longing, and joy all at once. The audience could sense the story embedded within the notes, even if they could not articulate it. Each person interpreted the music differently, yet all felt its truth, its authenticity. As she reached the midpoint of the performance, a subtle change occurred in the composition. She began to improvise, letting intuition guide her hands rather than following any sheet of music. The improvisation was effortless, as if the piano itself had become an extension of her thoughts. The audience gasped softly, realizing that this was not merely practice or skill, but genius in motion. The music felt alive, unpredictable, and yet perfectly coherent. Every chord, every shift in rhythm, every delicate pause was deliberate and meaningful. The room was silent except for the sound of the piano. People forgot to breathe in some moments, so captivated they were. Some clasped their hands together. Others sat frozen with their mouths slightly open. It was rare to witness such a transformation, and everyone present felt privileged to be there. The energy in the hall was no longer casual curiosity. It was reverence, a shared experience that transcended ordinary entertainment. She could feel the subtle shifts in the audience's attention, and it motivated her to continue, to explore the music further. She played with confidence, but not arrogance. Each movement an intimate conversation between her and the piano. There was joy in every note, a quiet exhilaration that came from creating something pure and beautiful. She allowed herself to be immersed in the moment, forgetting the audience entirely while simultaneously communicating with them through the language of music. As the piece continued, the variations became more daring, the melodies more intricate. The familiar tune was almost unrecognizable now, woven into a tapestry of emotion and technical brilliance. The audience could only watch, listen, and feel. Their initial expectations completely transformed. What they had anticipated as a simple, gentle performance had become an unforgettable experience, a glimpse into a hidden world of talent that had quietly existed, waiting for this moment to emerge. And still, she played, unaware of the impact she was having, unaware of the astonishment in the room. For her, there was only the music, flowing naturally, a bridge between her inner world and the hearts of those around her. Every note, every chord, every gentle shift in rhythm was an expression of herself, a piece of her story communicated without words. It was not a performance for applause or recognition. It was the purest form of expression, untainted and honest, reaching people in a way that few things could. By the time she reached the conclusion of this part of the tune, the audience was completely silent, holding their breath as though afraid to disturb the magic. The energy in the room was intense but gentle, a collective recognition of talent, effort, and emotion. People were aware that they had witnessed something rare, a glimpse into the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. The quiet woman at the piano had revealed a part of herself that no one expected, and the impact was profound, touching each person in a deeply personal way. She took a brief pause, her hands hovering over the keys as she listened to the silence that had settled over the hall. The quiet was thick with anticipation, as if the room itself were waiting to see what she would do next. She did not need to speak, for the music had already communicated far more than words ever could. Her mind replayed countless hours of practice, but now there was a freedom, a spark that came from performing not for others, but for the music itself. She allowed that spark to guide her, her fingers moving instinctively, almost as if they had a life of their own. The next notes were softer, more delicate, yet filled with an emotional weight that seemed to fill the entire room. Each chord carried a story, each pause a reflection. The audience leaned in, captivated, feeling emotions they had not expected to encounter at a small, local showcase. There was no showmanship, no forced dramatics, only pure expression. The music was honest, and honesty has a way of touching hearts that nothing else can. Some people closed their eyes, letting the melodies paint pictures in their minds. Memories surfaced for some, dreams stirred for others. The power of the music was not in its complexity alone, but in its ability to connect, to resonate with the human experience. A gentle hush fell over the hall, punctuated only by the occasional soft intake of breath from someone moved beyond words. It was rare, the way a performance could speak directly to people's souls, and everyone present sensed it. She began to explore more intricate patterns, her hands moving with a confidence and fluidity that seemed effortless. What had started as a simple tune was transforming into a full tapestry of sound, layers of melody and harmony intertwined seamlessly, carrying with them a depth that hinted at years of hidden talent. She had spent countless nights perfecting her technique in solitude, and now every note seemed to pay tribute to that dedication. The music was not just for the audience. It was a reflection of her journey, her emotions, her life. Some in the audience began to shift in their seats, unable to remain passive. They leaned forward, trying to catch every subtle inflection, every gentle rise and fall. The simple expectations they had brought with them were being dismantled, replaced with awe and admiration. Murmurs started quietly, whispers of disbelief and wonder. "I've never heard anything like this," one said softly. Another whispered, "She's incredible." These words did not distract her. They were just small ripples on the surface of the ocean she was creating with her music. She allowed herself a brief smile, though she did not look up. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the music was reaching the hearts of those listening. Her expression remained calm, almost serene, but inside, there was a surge of joy, a recognition of the moment's significance. She was not seeking fame or applause. She was simply sharing a piece of herself, and the response of the audience was proof that genuine expression has power beyond measure. The tune began to evolve further, each section revealing a new layer of her skill and emotion. She experimented with subtle variations, adjusting tempo, tone, and dynamics in ways that were natural but profound. The music flowed like a river, at times gentle and reflective, at times powerful and commanding. The audience could feel the movement, the ebb and flow of the performance, as if they were being carried along on a journey they had not anticipated taking. Some people began to show visible signs of being moved. A few wiped away tears that had formed unexpectedly, overwhelmed by the beauty and depth of the music. Others had their hands pressed lightly to their chests, as if trying to contain the emotions rising within them. She did not notice them individually, but she felt the collective energy in the room. It was a rare connection, the kind that transcends words. a shared understanding between performer and listener that existed purely in the moment. Her improvisation became more adventurous, exploring chords and rhythms that were unexpected yet harmonious. There was an element of surprise in each transition, a subtle complexity that revealed her mastery. The audience was captivated, some leaning back in astonishment, others sitting forward in anticipation of what would come next. The quiet woman at the piano had transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary, and everyone present could sense the uniqueness of the experience. She allowed herself to become fully absorbed in the music, losing awareness of time, space, and audience. Her fingers moved almost automatically, guided by intuition, emotion, and memory. Every note was intentional, yet spontaneous, a paradox that reflected both her skill and her heart. The simple tune that had begun the performance was no longer recognizable. It had become something entirely new, something that belonged to her and to this moment alone. The audience could feel the shift, the depth of the transformation. People who had initially been skeptical or indifferent now sat in rapt attention, completely absorbed. Some whispered softly to themselves, unable to believe the level of talent they were witnessing. Others had their eyes closed, allowing the music to envelop them completely. It was a shared experience, yet intensely personal, touching each individual in a different way. She moved seamlessly between soft, reflective passages and louder, more passionate sections. The contrast created a sense of journey, a narrative that unfolded without words. Every listener was experiencing the story differently, yet all were connected through the music. There was a subtle power in this connection, a quiet magic that drew people in and held them captive without force or demand. The room seemed to pulse with the energy of the performance. Chairs were still, breaths were held, and the only sound was the piano, resonant and alive. Each note carried with it an emotional weight, and the audience could feel it in their bones. There was an intimacy in the space, a shared understanding that this was a rare and special moment. People became aware that they were witnessing something they might never see again, a hidden genius revealed in the most unassuming way. She continued to weave her music, allowing subtle shifts and variations to emerge naturally. There was a sense of narrative in the flow, a storytelling quality that transcended the original simple tune. Every gesture of her fingers, every movement across the keys, was deliberate yet effortless. The audience could sense the authenticity, the honesty of expression that cannot be taught or manufactured. It was the kind of performance that stays with people long after the music ends. Some faces in the audience reflected astonishment, others a quiet recognition of the depth of talent before them. There was a mixture of emotions, awe, admiration, curiosity, and a profound respect. People who had come expecting ordinary entertainment were now witnessing something transformative. The energy in the room was almost tangible, a collective acknowledgement that they had been touched by something rare and beautiful. As she approached the climax of this part of the performance, the music took on a sense of urgency and intensity. Her fingers moved faster, yet every note was controlled, precise, and full of feeling. The audience could feel the tension, the build-up, the anticipation of what was to come. It was as though the piano itself were alive, responding to her emotions and amplifying them, carrying the audience along in its current. The simple tune had now evolved into a masterpiece of subtle complexity and raw emotion. The audience was fully engaged, caught in the spell of the music. Some held their breath, not wanting to break the moment, while others were visibly moved, their eyes glistening with tears. The room had transformed into a shared sanctuary, where the only language was the music and the only understanding was emotional resonance. She allowed the final notes of this section to linger, letting the sound fade naturally rather than ending abruptly. The hall was silent, heavy with the impact of what had just been played. The audience absorbed the experience, processing the unexpected depth and brilliance they had witnessed. It was a moment of collective reflection, a pause that felt like a bridge between the ordinary world and the extraordinary one she had created through her music. For her, the silence was a gentle companion, an acknowledgement of the connection she had formed without words. She did not need applause, for the music itself had communicated everything that mattered. And yet, in that stillness, she could feel the subtle shift in the room, the quiet admiration, the awe, the realization that she had revealed something truly remarkable. It was a rare and precious moment, one that affirmed the power of passion, dedication, and authenticity. She took a deep breath and allowed her fingers to move once more, letting the music guide her without restraint. The hall remained silent, every ear tuned to the delicate sounds emerging from the piano. Each note she played now carried a subtle intensity, a depth that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the keys. She was no longer simply performing. She was telling a story, one that was woven from years of practice, struggle, and quiet determination. The audience could sense the difference immediately. This was no ordinary performance, no casual display of skill. It was something rare, something transformative. As she continued, the music shifted again, moving between soft, reflective passages and sudden bursts of energy. Her hands danced across the keys with precision and grace, creating a rhythm that felt alive and unpredictable. The audience could feel the emotions behind every chord, the joy, the sorrow, the hope, and the longing that she poured into each note. Some people closed their eyes, letting the melodies fill their minds and hearts. Others leaned forward, eyes wide, unable to tear their gaze away from the piano and the woman who seemed almost possessed by the music. She was fully immersed in the performance, aware of the room only in the sense that it held the listeners who had come to witness this moment. The energy in the hall was palpable, a silent conversation between the musician and the audience. Every gesture of her fingers, every subtle change in tone, every pause carried meaning. It was as though the piano itself were speaking, amplifying the emotions she felt and translating them into something that could be understood without words. The simple tune that had started the performance was now almost unrecognizable. She had transformed it, layer by layer, into a complex and beautiful composition that seemed to belong to another world. The audience could feel the evolution, the growth of the music, and they were captivated. Some whispered to themselves, unsure if they were witnessing reality or a dream. Others sat silently, absorbing every detail, every subtle nuance, letting the music wash over them like a gentle tide. Her improvisation grew more daring, exploring intricate patterns and unexpected harmonies. The complexity was stunning, yet it never felt forced. Each variation flowed naturally, as if it had always existed and was simply waiting for her to discover it. She moved seamlessly between quiet, introspective moments and powerful, passionate passages, taking the audience on a journey without ever leaving the piano. There was a sense of storytelling in the music, a narrative that unfolded in real time, unique and unrepeatable. Some members of the audience began to show visible signs of being moved. A few wiped away tears, overcome by the beauty and honesty of what they were hearing. Others clasped their hands together, as if to steady themselves, or rested them lightly on their chests, feeling the impact of the music deep within. It was a rare connection, a moment when the barriers between performer and listener seemed to disappear, leaving only shared emotion. She was not aware of each individual reaction, but she could feel the collective response, the way the room had become a living entity, breathing and pulsing with the music. The tempo shifted once more, growing slightly faster, yet retaining a delicate balance. She allowed her emotions to guide her hands, letting intuition dictate the rhythm and flow. Each note carried intention, yet there was a spontaneity that made the performance feel alive. The audience could sense that she was not simply playing from memory, but from a deep understanding of the music and a profound connection to its expression. There was an authenticity here that could not be replicated, a sincerity that resonated deeply. As the music progressed, small variations and embellishments appeared, subtle but powerful. She experimented with dynamics, letting some notes linger while others darted quickly, creating a rich tapestry of sound. The audience was completely absorbed, unable to tear themselves away. Some whispered softly, marveling at her skill, while others simply sat in quiet awe. The room had transformed from a casual gathering into a sacred space, filled with shared reverence and admiration. Her fingers moved with confidence and fluidity, each movement precise yet effortless. She navigated the piano with an ease that only comes from years of practice and a deep understanding of the instrument. Yet, there was something more than technique here. There was emotion, intuition, and a unique personal touch that made every note feel alive. The music carried her feelings, her experiences, and her passion directly to the listeners, creating an intimate and powerful connection. The audience could feel the journey the music was taking them on. Each passage carried its own mood, its own energy, and its own story. Some moments were tender and reflective, inviting introspection and memory. Others were bold and powerful, filling the room with energy and excitement. The contrast created a sense of movement and progression, a narrative that unfolded organically. The listeners were not just watching a performance. They were participating in an emotional experience, guided by the music and the woman who created it. She allowed herself to be fully present, letting the music flow through her without concern for how it would be received. She did not play for applause or recognition, but for the pure expression of herself and the story she wanted to tell. The audience, in turn, responded with deep attention and respect, recognizing the authenticity and brilliance of what they were experiencing. It was a rare moment, a convergence of skill, emotion, and connection that could only happen when both performer and audience were fully engaged. The improvisation grew even more intricate, with layers of melody intertwining seamlessly. The audience could hear the evolution of the tune, from something simple and familiar to a complex and breathtaking composition. Some people gasped softly, while others leaned forward, eyes wide in disbelief. The quiet woman at the piano had become a conduit for something extraordinary, revealing a depth of talent that had remained hidden until this very moment. She allowed a gentle crescendo to build, increasing the intensity without losing control or precision. Each chord, each note, carried weight and significance, drawing the audience deeper into the performance. The room was alive with the music, and the listeners felt every emotion as if it were their own. There was a sense of unity, a shared experience that transcended individual differences and created a collective awareness of the beauty unfolding before them. As she neared the climax of this section, the music became more expressive, more dynamic. Her fingers moved with extraordinary agility, creating patterns that were intricate yet harmonious. The audience could sense the dedication, the countless hours of practice, and the quiet perseverance that had brought her to this moment. Every note was a testament to her skill, every pause a reflection of her understanding of timing and emotion. The music was alive, breathing, and communicating in a language beyond words. The atmosphere in the hall was electric, yet calm, charged with emotion yet peaceful. The audience sat in silence, fully immersed, feeling the power of the music resonate within them. Some were moved to tears, others smiled softly, and many simply sat in awe, unable to comprehend the depth and beauty of what they were witnessing. It was a rare and profound connection, one that left everyone present feeling changed, even if only slightly. As she allowed the final notes of this section to resonate, the room seemed to hold its breath, savoring the lingering sound. The music had created a moment suspended in time, a space where ordinary life paused and something extraordinary could be experienced fully. The audience absorbed the moment, letting the impact of her talent, passion, and expression settle within them. It was a silent acknowledgement, a collective understanding that they had witnessed something remarkable, a hidden genius revealed in the most unassuming way. She took a gentle breath and let her hands linger over the keys, feeling the vibrations of the piano as they settled into the quiet of the room. The audience remained silent, held captive not by force, but by a sense of awe that had quietly grown over the course of her performance. Her eyes lifted briefly, not to seek recognition, but to meet the subtle expressions on the faces before her. They were astonished, moved, and mesmerized, yet she felt no need to change her approach. This was not about applause or validation. It was about sharing something deeply personal, a gift that had been waiting for the right moment to emerge. The final part of her piece began softly, almost as if she were whispering secrets through the piano. Each note was deliberate, each chord carefully chosen to convey emotion without words. The melody flowed like a gentle stream, carrying the listeners along with it, tugging at hearts and memories. There was an intimacy in her playing that made the hall feel smaller, closer, as though every individual present were part of a private conversation with the music. It was impossible to look away, impossible to be indifferent. She allowed herself a small, serene smile, feeling the connection without needing to acknowledge it verbally. The music had a life of its own now, a rhythm and depth that could not be stopped or contained. Her fingers moved gracefully across the keys, weaving patterns of sound that were both intricate and natural. The audience could feel the layers of meaning, the emotional highs and lows, the quiet moments of reflection and the crescendos of intensity. Each person experienced it differently, yet all were bound together by the shared sensation of beauty and authenticity. Some people leaned forward, their eyes wide, trying to take in every detail. Others closed their eyes, letting the music paint pictures in their minds. A few dabbed at tears that had escaped, moved unexpectedly by the raw emotion of the performance. She did not play to provoke this reaction, yet she welcomed it silently, knowing that genuine expression often touches people in ways words cannot. There was power in honesty, and she had never needed to prove herself before this moment. Now, her music spoke for her, revealing the hidden genius that had long existed in quiet solitude. The tune gradually shifted, moving from gentle and reflective to bold and commanding. She allowed herself to be carried by intuition, letting her emotions guide the flow of the music. Each chord, each variation, seemed to tell a story that transcended language. The audience could feel the narrative without needing to understand it fully. It was an emotional truth that resonated with them all. Some smiled softly, others had tears streaming quietly, and a few simply sat in stunned silence, captivated by the beauty of what they were hearing. As she explored the final movements of her piece, the music became more complex yet remained graceful. Her improvisations were daring but harmonious, blending unexpected variations seamlessly into the melody. The audience felt the subtle genius behind each choice, recognizing that this was not mere technical skill, but deep understanding and emotional intelligence expressed through sound. The piano became an extension of her thoughts, her experiences, and her heart, and the audience sensed every nuance. She allowed a gentle crescendo to rise, building the intensity carefully without overwhelming the delicate balance of the music. The notes flowed like waves, rolling, breaking, and settling, guiding the listeners through an emotional journey that felt both personal and universal. The room seemed to breathe along with her, each person responding to the ebb and flow of the sound. There was a magical quality to the shared experience, a sense that something extraordinary had emerged from an ordinary setting. Her fingers moved with confidence, each one precise yet effortless. The melody continued to evolve, rich with emotion and depth. The audience was held spellbound, caught in a moment that felt timeless. Some whispered quietly, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Others sat silently, completely absorbed, aware that they were experiencing something rare and profound. The quiet woman at the piano had revealed a talent that had remained hidden, and the effect was undeniable. She shifted gently into the closing sequence, allowing the music to soften and slow. The final notes were delicate, lingering in the air like a fading memory. She did not rush the ending. Each chord had its place, each pause its significance. The audience remained still, listening to the last sounds as if not wanting them to disappear. There was a sense of reverence, a shared acknowledgement that this had been more than a performance. It was a revelation, a display of hidden brilliance that had emerged without warning, touching hearts in the most unexpected way. As the final note echoed and faded, a brief silence followed. It was not an awkward pause, but a moment of reflection, a collective intake of breath. The audience processed what they had just experienced, feeling the depth, beauty, and emotion of the music lingering within them. Eyes that had been wide with astonishment now shimmered with admiration. Some faces were wet with tears, others softened in gentle smiles. There was a quiet acknowledgement that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the hall, at first tentative, polite, almost reverent, and then growing into a warm, sustained expression of appreciation. People stood, clapping and cheering, some calling out softly their amazement. The sound was not just for skill, but for authenticity, for the courage to share something so personal and profound. She did not rise immediately to bow. She remained seated, letting the moment settle, appreciating the quiet impact of her music. The applause continued, and she finally allowed herself to rise, offering a gentle nod of acknowledgement. There was humility in her movements, a quiet grace that matched the tone of the performance. She did not seek the spotlight. The music itself had carried the story. People came forward quietly afterward, expressing admiration, asking questions, offering words of awe and respect. Yet she responded with warmth and simplicity, never seeking to elevate herself above the experience, simply grateful for the connection she had created. The performance left a lasting impression, not just in the applause or words, but in the hearts of those present. People spoke of it long after leaving the hall, recounting the emotions they had felt, the beauty they had witnessed, and the wonder of a hidden genius revealed. Some were inspired, thinking of talents they themselves had overlooked. Others reflected on the power of quiet dedication and the importance of following one's passion, without expectation. It was a reminder that brilliance can exist anywhere, often unnoticed, waiting for the right moment to shine. For her, the experience was equally profound. She had shared a part of herself that was usually hidden, letting the music communicate what words could not. She did not need recognition or reward. The true value was in the moment itself, the connection created, and the lives touched through sound and emotion. She packed her folder carefully, her hands lingering briefly on the keys as if saying goodbye to an old friend. The audience's admiration and awe were a gentle acknowledgement of her years of quiet dedication. But the real reward was the intangible impact of the music on those who had listened. The hall gradually emptied, but the memory of the performance lingered, like a melody that stays in the mind long after the final note has faded. People left with hearts full, inspired and moved, carrying with them the experience of having witnessed something rare and beautiful. And she, walking quietly out of the hall, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The music had been shared, the hidden genius revealed, and a moment of true human connection had been created without words, without fanfare, simply through the power of talent, passion, and honesty.